Back to Peston on Sunday, and I'm delighted to be joined by the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. Chancellor, you wrote a piece in today's Sunday Times in which you're warning that there won't be a spending splurge, and that actually seem to imply that any additional money that you get is going to be banked. This is a time, though, of acute crisis in many of our public services, whether it's social care or hospitals or schools. I saw a head teacher on Friday who was in, almost panic about running out of money. This is a moment to be spending, isn't it?
Well, what I would say, first of all, is that the economy at the moment, from the data we have, is running very much according to the forecast that was set out at the autumn. So those figures we saw very recently, which show borrowing figures considerably better than people had been expecting, that was a one-off. When you're not seeing much better borrowing looking over the next year or two. Well, we'll see when we get the OBR report in the coming week. But we shouldn't mistake any short-term change in the borrowing figures due to one-off factors for a long-term structural change.
These were one-off.
Somebody gives you a bit more headroom on your credit card. It doesn't mean you have to rush out and spend it all at once. But let me address the point you made about public services. Yes, we know that some of our public services are under pressure, but the pressure that they're under is due to long-term factors, demographic factors, and we have to address the sustainability of our public services over the long term. We've got to look at the real underlying challenges and issues here, not just rush around dealing with short-term.
Which has got a high reputation, did say last week that austerity was now biting and that the government had not been strategic enough in where you place the cuts. And as a result of that, prisons in crisis, police in crisis, schools in crisis, health in crisis. You have got to get better, haven't you, at allocating the resources where they're needing it and driving efficiencies where they're possible?
We've certainly got to drive efficiencies where they're possible, and we've got to drive into our public services a culture of efficiency as business as usual. It's something,
do you recognise this
something you do every year.
Well,
you talk about crisis in our prisons. I mean, what happened in our prisons is that we've been affected by the introduction of a new type of drugs, which has had a dramatic effect on the way prisons operate and the way they need to be managed. And you'd expect the government to respond when the facts change, and we have responded. We've put money into the prisons because we need to deal with a different situation.
Not just drugs, it's capacity,
we've got to be,
isn't it?
We've got to be flexible. We've got to be able to respond, and that's one of the reasons why, in setting out our fiscal rules and our path to getting Britain back to living within its means, we've given ourselves enough headroom to deliver that flexibility if we need it.
Social care, everybody says there's a crisis there, including your own Prime Minister, that she recognises that something has to be done. Widespread reports today that you found another billion down the back of the sofa.
Well, I'm not, I'm afraid, going to come on your show, Robert, and tell you what the budget on Wednesday will say. So I advise you to tune in on Wednesday.
So that billion is there. That billion's obviously there.
But let me say this. We've recognised that there are pressures in the social care system and that those pressures are having an effect on the way the NHS works. But it isn't just about money. We've got 24 local authorities responsible for 50% of all the delayed discharges in the NHS. We've got some areas where collaboration between the NHS and social care is working extremely well. So it's about spreading best practice, it's about dealing with the weak spots. It isn't just about pouring money in.
The Sunday Times says you are building up a £60 billion war chest in case Brexit goes wrong and there's a major shock to the economy. Is that how you see what you're doing on fiscal policy, with the trajectory for bringing borrowing down?
No, I don't recognise that number at all. What I said at autumn statement is that we need to balance the clear intention to get to balance in the public finances in the next Parliament with the need to invest and the needs of the everyday economy, the needs of ordinary working families, the needs of our public services. We've got to get that balance right. But I do think that any Chancellor who's being prudent, setting off on a journey of the type that we are doing, will want to make sure that there's enough fuel in the tank to make sure we get to the other end of that journey. We need that resilience as we embark on this process.
How great do you measure the risk of a Brexit shock? We haven't actually left, or we haven't even triggered the negotiations to leave the EU. How great a risk is there that there will at some point be a slowdown caused by Brexit?
Well, I think we've seen the initial impact of the referendum decision in the depreciation of sterling over the course of last autumn, and that is now feeding through into our economy in the form of slightly higher inflation. It's probably worth saying that these are sort of inflation projections in the 2-point-something % that even a few years ago we would have given our right arms to have. But there is going to be a little bit higher inflation.
And therefore squeeze on wages and therefore a slowdown in spending.
Well, possibly. But consumers have shown themselves to be remarkably resilient over the last 6 months. They've confounded the pundits. And what I hope this year is that we will see exports contributing a little more to economic growth, that we'll see business investment contributing a little more as consumer demand puts the pressure on business to invest to meet that demand.
So the risk of a serious Brexit shock, you think, is small?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what the future of the economy will bring. We'll see what the OBR forecasts.
Sure, that's the OBR, but I'm asking you personally. I mean, you are somebody who's never been shy about talking about the future.
My job, Robert, is not to speculate about the future. It's to build resilience in our economy so that we can deal with the future, so that we can exploit the opportunities that there are in the future, so that we can deal with any issues we have to deal with as we go forward. That's the job of the Chancellor, to make sure the economy is resilient, we can protect people, we can protect our standards of living.
And just very briefly, before we go into the break, you came into the job as Chancellor basically challenging Treasury orthodoxy about bringing down borrowing. You've now been captured, haven't you?
I don't think I've been captured at all. I've always been a fiscal conservative, but I think it's important that we do this on a trajectory that makes sense and that we balance the need for discipline in the public finances with the need for investment in our country's economic future and the need to support families as they go about their everyday lives.
Now, please don't go away. We've got lots more from the Chancellor after the break. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. I'm thrilled that the Chancellor is still with me. But first, Allegra, what do the viewers make of it so far?
Well, this morning there's been speculation, hasn't there, that there will be in the budget £1 billion to help with social care. We have the Labour MP from Oldham saying even if that does come forward, the Chancellor wouldn't be drawn on it, but he says even if it does, it doesn't touch the sides of the £4.6 billion already cut from social care. Just one of the headaches for the Chancellor. We're going to canter through a few of the other ones. This is a graph that was made by the Financial Times. I hope it's this button here. Yeah, it is. And it was shared widely on Twitter over the last week. OK, this is pointing something quite stark out. We, the UK, have had pretty good GDP growth over, those letters in the wrong way, never mind, over 2007 to 2015, but we haven't had quite such good wage growth. OK, now there are various reasons. You can't put all this all on the Tories, but nonetheless, let's look at this from the IFS. The graph doesn't lie, does it? So you have your trend growth for wages. It's the grey line. That's what we would like it to be. And this is what it actually is, OK? So if there is a problem for the Chancellor on wages, I can hear him whispering with Robert. Maybe they'll tell us what they're discussing in a second. Now, the next place we need to go to is the problem coming up, which is the cost of Brexit. This is another problem on the horizon for the government. The EU is suggesting we will have a whopping bill when we leave the EU. The Centre for European Reform put out 3 estimates what it might be. You've got 57 billion up here, cost of High Speed 2. Not so bad, 48 billion. That would be 5 Olympics. But then this is the not so bad one right down at the bottom, but still a whopping 25 billion pounds, the equivalent of 130,000 new homes being built. Or we could just walk away, according to a Lord's report yesterday, which would be more a hostile Brexit than a hard Brexit. I'm
delighted that Philip Hammond's still with me. On this issue of the legal advice that the government's received, that actually you may not be obliged to hand over a ton of money post actually leaving, does it actually matter? Because at the end of the day, the big thing that we want is access to the single market. There's no question that other European governments are going to demand that we pay something for that. So this issue of whether it's legally binding or not is sort of irrelevant, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think it's irrelevant because we are a country that very much abides by the rule of law. We meet our international obligations, and if there are any outstanding dues that we are obliged to pay, of course we will pay them. That's the kind of country we are. But I don't recognise any of these numbers. This is
what do you think the number will be? Do you have a sense of that?
We're on the brink of a negotiation, and I'm really not surprised. In fact, I'd be surprised if people in the European Union weren't putting down very large numbers. This is positioning ahead of a negotiation, and we should see it exactly for what it is, a piece of pre-negotiation positioning.
Do you have a sense of what you think it's reasonable to hand over in terms of money for access to the single market?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on anything like that. We've said that we will be as transparent as we can about the negotiating process, but we're certainly not going to set out our red lines or our preconceptions before we go into the
I mean, obviously that that advice that there's no legal obligation to pay up those dues in terms of future budget planning to 2021, that legal advice does become very relevant if we don't get a deal and, you know, we do what you said we could definitely do in your Die Welt article, which is just to walk away. How likely do you think it is that we will be forced just to walk away with no deal?
Well, the Prime Minister's always been clear that no deal is better than a bad deal.
And you agree? Do you agree with that?
Oh, I do think no deal is better than a bad deal, of course.
But no deal would be, for example, not in the customs union. We haven't got the capacity at ports to deal with all the customs checks we would need to make. So is no deal really better?
Well, so let me answer your question. Yeah. Since the Prime Minister made her Lancaster House speech in January, I've spent a lot of time talking to European colleagues, and I do think the mood music, the atmosphere has changed. Whatever is being said publicly ahead of the negotiation, the private messaging is that people are now engaging with this more as a shared problem, something that we have to solve together. There are lots of European jobs at stake in relation to exports to the UK, trade with the UK, and there is an increasingly pragmatic approach. Now, we shouldn't be blind to the fact that our European partners also have political red lines that they will want to protect. But I feel confident that we are moving closer together, not further apart, as we go through this process, which I think means it was absolutely right not to move quickly to serve the Article 50 notice after the referendum last year.
Though some would say you should wait till after Angela Merkel and the German, election. You should have waited till the autumn.
Well, there's a balance to be struck here. Our European partners have been pressing us to do this. You talked about generating goodwill in the negotiations. I think we've probably waited as long as we sensibly can in terms of the goodwill of our partners, but it's certainly the case
that of your MP.
some of the more extreme reactions that we heard immediately after the referendum have dissipated a bit, and people who were feeling very aggressive towards us are now feeling a bit more constructive.
Now, we are almost out of time. You, more than anyone, knows how much the British economy is dependent on EU nationals living here, whether it is building the houses that you want to build, whether it's working in the health service. Why not just tell them now that they can stay? Why not accept the Lord's amendment?
Because we have to protect the couple of million British nationals who are living in the European Union.
But that's not the point, is it?
We have to get a fair deal for them as well. And we've been clear, Prime Minister...
But it's not a credible... it's not credible to use the EU nationals here as a bargaining chip, since everybody in the rest of Europe knows we can't possibly turf them out because the economy would implode if we turfed them out.
This isn't about turfing people out. This is about the rights people have. This is about giving people the full long-term right to remain and to establish themselves in the United Kingdom.
Is there really doubt around that?
We've been very clear from the beginning. There's no doubt in our minds that we want to do it. We've been clear from the beginning that we want to do it. We've offered to do it as a standalone deal. The Prime Minister has been clear that she would like to do this at the very front end of the negotiating process. It hasn't been us.
But it's a bad look for us, isn't it, that we're not prepared to give those people the security they want.
We are prepared. We've been saying consistently that we're ready to do a deal before the negotiations start. We're ready to do a deal at the very beginning of the negotiation. It has been other members of the European Union that have said, no, this can only be done as part of the overall deal. We can't do it as a separate deal.
Chancellor, very good to see you,
Thank you.
again, and we look forward to see what's in that red book on Wednesday. Now, let's...